Emory acquired that campus in 1998, and it had been owned for the previous 50 years, I think, by the state, and was used for a couple of different purposes. One was initially as the location for the DeKalb County Drug and Alcohol Addiction Rehabilitation Center. That may not be the right name, so you'd have to double check that. But it was basically a drug and alcohol rehab center run by DeKalb County. Later it became, with Emory's help, kind of in collaboration between Emory's psychiatry department and the state Department of Corrections, I think it became the Georgia Mental Health Institute, GMHI. And it was used for some 20 years in that capacity as both a place to house persons with various degrees of mental abnormality, whether it was mental illness or some other form of mental abnormality that were wards of the state. They didn't have funding for other kinds of care. It was also used as a forensic psychiatric unit. That is, for a time, persons who were imprisoned for crimes that they had committed because of insanity, murder, for instance, and were found not guilty by reason of insanity, but couldn't be left out on the street, were housed in facilities over there. I don't know exactly when the state stopped using it, but it had been pretty much empty or not very significantly used for probably a decade before Emory acquired it. The way Emory acquired it was that there were conversations between Emory and Georgia Tech about collaborating in the development of a biotechnology incubation center, that is, a place where faculty members in particular who were developing biomedical devices or other kinds of inventions, particularly in the biomedical field, could use some space to start up companies and begin marketing those devices. And the state then began to inquire of Emory and Georgia Tech whether we'd be interested in acquiring the property. So Emory did acquire the property under the condition that we would undertake this collaboration with Georgia Tech, and that we would develop the site, and that we would not sell the property without permission of the state. So those were sort of the conditions of our purchase of it. I think that we paid around $3 million for 42 acres. Let me go back to the very beginning and the construction of the mansion that's there. I don't know if have you been to the property? Have you been over there? So you've seen the big yellow mansion, and I think it was built in 1920 by the second oldest son of Asa Candler. Asa Candler, of course, was the founder of the Coca-Cola Company and a great benefactor of Emory. And both he and a number of his children built houses in the Druid Hills area. That house is up the street from Callenwold. Callenwold was the home of Candler's oldest son, Charles Howard Candler. Briarcliff was the home of Asa Candler Jr., who was the second son, and whose nickname was Buddy, B-U-D-D-I-E. So Buddy built the house in 1920, and in about 1947 or 1948, he sold the house to the state. My understanding of the history is that initially the DeKalb County Drug and Alcohol Rehab Center used that house as a facility, and then the state built the large building called Building A, and the other buildings around that campus. beginning in the 60s. So probably for a decade or so it was a DeKalb County facility, and then from the 60s until probably the late 80s it was Georgia Mental Health Institute. There was a pool, actually there were 2 swimming pools on the property when Candler was living there. One was in the front of the house and one was in the back, kind of behind where the greenhouses are. The one that's in the front was filled in, and I think there's still the remnants of the fountain. We used to let children from the neighborhood come and swim in that pool. It was kind of the public swimming pool. He also was a bit of a character. He kept circus animals on the property, and some of those animals were donated later when they became unmanageable to the Atlanta Zoo. But presumably he used to ship circus animals into the depot, which is now Zaya. Then they would be trucked from there over to the Briarcliff campus, and he would actually charge admission for people to come in and look at his zoo. Well, my understanding is, I think the tunnels are pretty well closed off. I think they're still there as far as I know, but they're locked and it's hard to get access to them. But my understanding is that those were connectors from the central main building to the cottages, which were used to house patients, and that the tunnels gave easy access in all kinds of weather, and were also secure, so that you could bring patients, particularly the forensic patients, the ones who were determined to be criminally insane, you could bring them from the cottages into the main facility if you needed to, for physical checkups, for eating, for whatever kind of care they needed, without risking their escaping in some way. They would be contained. So they were really access from the central building to the cottages. And it's easy to understand where all that would come from, because when you walk into that building, it's scary. I mean, it has an air of either The Shining or you know, something like Friday the 13th. Some of those hallways look relatively undisturbed for the last 20 years. You wonder who was the last person out, and did they really turn the lights off?